here is our agenda, and we're going to move right into the Landlord Hour. Now, during this presentation, which is I pre-recorded with Ian day before yesterday, it's a great presentation for landlords. I want you to pay attention, but I also, if you have any questions or comments, we all learn from interacting. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to go down to the bottom of your screen, click the Q&A, and put a question in or a comment, and everybody will be able to see that. They won't be able to see your name. They'll just see what you typed in as your name. And most people just have their first name, but I'm not afraid to tell you that I'm John Adams. So anyway, but I'd love it if you'd participate. And so here goes. Thank you. Let's have another cup of coffee. I've got Margie just brought me some coffee. So this is a perfectly good time to start with my friend, Ian Robbins. And so let's share screen and go right back to it. And we'll try to get us out of here on time. And remember that all of this is sort of premised on my idea that you can retire comfortably on as few as 10 little rental houses. You don't need to own 30. You don't need to own 50. You know, people ask me, should I own 100 houses? And you certainly can if you want to, but my question is why? What is it you are trying to accomplish? What number are you trying to hit? If you want 100 properties, I just would ask why. I mean, why not 1,000? Why not 10,000? And at what point do you have your needs met? And these are just questions that, you know, different people have different answers for, and that's okay. I'm not saying 100 houses is a problem. I have a friend, a former pilot friend of mine in Sonoya, Georgia, who does own over 100 houses, and he manages them himself. And I'm so proud of him because that was a goal that he had, and he has achieved that goal. I don't have that goal. So anyway, let's forge ahead and see if we can get here to the next slide and start. Oh, I do want to remind you, the 2021 Landlord Survival Guide is out. I'm awfully proud of it. It is a work of art. It is no longer a printed book. It is an online subscription. Now we're going to have a printed guide, okay? But the book itself is online because it is a work in progress. And if I were to send you, today is January 16th. If I were to send you a printed copy of the book today, next week it would be out of date. But you'd be reading it and you'd be saying, wait a minute, I thought this was valid information. Well, it was on the 16th, but things change. And a perfect example of that is this $25 billion rental assistance program. And we're going to know more about it next week. So if you've never been a subscriber or a purchaser of the Survival Guide before, it's $197. It's unconditionally money back guaranteed to be a great investment. If for any reason it's not what you're looking for, just call us, tell us, and we'll still be friends. How about that? But I just think you're going to be very pleased. Most of my landlords tell me it saves them more than a month's rent every year for every property. That's a lot. Average rent now is what, $1,200, $1,400, $1,600, somewhere in there? I don't know. Yours may be different. So what do we know about this $25 billion? And why do I always go ba? Well, first, I'm a big fan of Bing Crosby, but also because I want you to understand the difference between billions and millions. A million is 1,000 thousands. So, for example, if you took the old Atlanta Stadium that seated about 50,000 people, and you did that, that's 50,000. So two of them would be 100,000. So 20 Atlanta stadiums would hold 1 million people. Got it? 20 Atlanta stadiums, 1 million people. That's a lot. But a billion is 1,000 times that many. So it would be, well, anyway, it's a lot. A billion is 1,000 million.
Honey, you're getting tangled.
I am getting tangled. Well, we need to get a mathematician in here. So money is coming to the states, but right now we do not know the process for applying on behalf of your tenant for this money. The money is supposed to be made available to every state in the union by January 20th. Today is January 16th. Somebody somewhere is preparing for it, but I have been all over this state and nobody knows. They keep telling me that Georgia's going to get about $706 million, which is plenty for you and me. I'll split it with you. Okay. Yeah, it's only going to be you and me. We might as well split it. And it's going to be allotted to the counties and the municipalities based somewhat on population. If the municipality doesn't have 200,000 residents, it is not eligible to handle its own distribution. Whole thing is really screwy. I don't know where they came up with this idea. It is supposed to be handled by relief agencies. And we're talking about people like United Way or the housing authority of the county where your property is located, or we just don't know yet where the application is going to be taken. But if the money hits Georgia on the 20th, which is Wednesday, I would hope by Thursday morning, we would know something. It can be used for past due rent and future rent up to 12 months. In fact, they go on to say up to 15 months if necessary. I don't know what necessary is, but I like 15 months better than 12. And if it's paying for future rent, we might as well go on out to 15, okay? We do know that the landlord will be able to apply on behalf of the tenant. This is going to be vitally important to you because I know your tenant and they don't care. Your tenant couldn't care less about this. They're just not motivated because they're not allowed to spend this on their motorcycle payment, or on a vacation, or on a new big screen television set. It has to be used for rent or for utilities, okay? And they don't care. But you, on the other hand, can apply on their behalf. You will have to get their signature, but that shouldn't be any difficulty. And then the tenant has to be impacted by COVID and the pandemic. Hey, everybody has been impacted. It is targeted to lower income tenants. And I'm not going to go into all the details because one, we don't have them, and two, it varies by a locale. But I expect by Thursday or Friday, certainly next Saturday, to have a lot of information on this, and I'll make sure that you know about it, okay? And there is more coming. You can just bet on that. So I do need to remind you about the Video Made Easy webinar. It's presented by me. It's going to be next Wednesday, January 20th from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's going to be a live Q&A afterwards. It's $49 unless you are a realtor or a landlord, in which case you get in free. please go to money99.com and click on video, or that's not up at this moment, but it will be soon. But if you're in Eager Beaver, go ahead and send an email to video@money99.com. That's video@money99.com. And we got to get moving here. By the way, it's limited to the first 100 registrants. These things are always sellouts. So quick, go send me an email right now. Now, this is a pre-recorded segment between me and Ian Robbins, and we're going to be talking about screening of tenants legally. And you need to know this. And so I'm going to play the pre-recorded segment with my friend Ian Robbins, and I'm going to be answering questions in the Q&A while this is going on. So if you have any questions about anything, put that in the Q&A and I will try to answer them, and everybody can see that. You can see all of the Q&A. And I think, Margie, are we going to be able to pull those out and send it to people?
Yes.
Okay, good. We will share that with you as well. We've had some great questions so far. So here we go with me and Ian Robbins. And we are back for our landlord segment. Joining me is my very special guest and evil twin, Ian Robbins, the landlord extraordinaire, is out there. Ian is the president for life. That's like President AV. You remember the last President AV, Ian, was Baby Doc Duvalier, that in Haiti, that took like $80 billion out of the poorest country in the world, and he's now living in Switzerland. And I think you probably have the same setup in mind. So
I could do it with 40 billion, but we'll think about that.
I think the FBI is after him, but I'm not sure. In any case, Ian has managed to not only have a successful day job, which of course our 1031 friend John Mangum does the same thing, but Ian also invests in real estate on the side and has really come into his own as a landlord, and I think has a lot of good ideas to share with us. Ian, welcome to the Real Estate Coffee Break as usual.
Thank you, John. Always an honor to talk with you and your audience.
Well, you're very kind. One of the things that you pointed out to me that just I had a light bulb go off, and I love those light bulb moments, because so often, you know, when you hear something a different way or you're thinking about it in a different context, you sort of get a new insight sometimes. And one of the things you said that I'd like to sort of take a deep dive on is you said there are 3 specific areas that are most important to you in considering an application. And I'd like to run over those. Let me just right off the top tell everybody what they are, and we'll come back and look at them one by one. Is that okay?
Sure.
Good. The first you said is the person's rental history. And I'm assuming that's what their experience was, not only with the last landlord, but even before that. Second is their employment status, or likelihood of continued employment, I guess. And then their income. And those are sort of inextricably linked. In most cases, people are trading hours for dollars, and we need to be able to verify that and find out what it is. And the third area is credit history and credit score. Why are you focused on those 3 things, Ian, instead of, if the person is, you just don't like their looks, or they have a funny accent, or, you know, what, I don't know. They're slovenly and they're driving a foreign car.
Because I treat it like a business and I am managing risk.
So exactly what does that mean? Treat it like a business. Obviously, we know there are people that treat their real estate as if it's a hobby, and that just doesn't work out. But you have a systematic and a documentable procedure, and you focused on these three things. What about these three items sets them apart from some of the less tangible, I guess you'd say, things we take into account sometimes when we're judging other people?
Well, John, basically it's about fear. Fear is about having a fair credit complaint. So I know that if I can document what I'm doing and doing it on a very business-like level and not worrying about any of the protected classes, just looking at how I'm going to get paid my rent, then I know that if something does happen where somebody files a complaint against me, then I have the right documentation. So I'm not fearful, and most importantly, I could sleep at night. And I think for our listeners, if we can teach them how to reduce stress and have something, as you say, tangible to work with, then they can have less concern, and they can also run their business correctly.
Well said. I just would add to that. I know you and I think every American embraces our Constitution, which says that anybody who can afford to can live anywhere they want. We can't discriminate, and certainly shouldn't discriminate on the basis of the color of somebody's skin or where they're from or how they happen to talk. These are not relevant factors in whether or not they're going to pay their rent. And as a businessman, I agree with you. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you look like. I want to know, are you going to be able to pay the rent? And I think these three are important. So let's, and the other thing I'd like to say right off the bat, I am not a member of a protected class. In fact, you and I are in the worst class possible, Ian. We are both angry old white men.
Well, actually, John, I disagree with what you said. I think every breathing human being is in a protected class because we have a sex, and no kidding aside. So if you're looking at two equal candidates, and one is a male, one is a female, and you choose the one over the other, then the other side can say you chose me because of my sex.
Well,
so,
and yeah, let me just jump in and say there is no question that that prejudice continues to exist. I hope it will end one day, but I'm afraid it's just part of life. And to the extent that prejudice does exist, anytime anybody gets turned down for anything they apply for, you've got one unit for rent and you may have 30 applications. You may have, in your case, 100 applications. That means a lot of people are going to be unhappy. And if I were a member of a protected class and I had experienced prejudice at some time in the past in my life, then it would not be unnatural for me to say, wait a minute, the reason that Ian Robbins turned me down is that I'm from Mars. And Ian actually privately hates people from Mars, even though he's never said so. But just because I'm little and I'm a green man and I arrived in a spaceship, I don't think I should be denied this, when in fact he has no evidence of income. But by concentrating on these three areas, you have a paper trail. If he files an equal opportunity complaint, before the Civil Rights Commission, which is very, very serious, by the way.
And easy for them to do and costs them no money, but it costs me tons of money to defend, then I have to be able to work backwards and know that that's coming and expect it to come. And I think, John, something should be said about the word criteria. It is totally fair. It's inside the fair housing to have written criteria. And as long as you treat everybody the same and you have minimum standards, then they can't, they have less of a case. They can sue you for anything at any time. But, you know, to lighten it up a little bit, I don't qualify to play for the Atlanta Hawks. I am 5'11", and I'm 58 years old. I don't qualify. It's perfectly acceptable if I turn in an application for the Atlanta Hawks for them to say, no, I can't come back and say, well, you discriminated against me. It's not going to happen, but people can try. So going back to landlording, as long as you have written criteria beforehand, and then you can apply them in a very business-like or non-emotional way, then you can make a decision on your tenant. And
I like it.
And then you can have a score, and it also has to survive a lot of time because unfortunately a fair housing complaint, they file the complaint and it can take 2 years for them to finally wake up and talk to you about your file. And then if you pull out your file, you have the documentation, but it goes back to the killer lease. You know, you could have somebody in a house for 2.5 years and something can occur and you can go back to the lease and there'll be a clause in there that will survive. And it's a business decision and you don't have to worry about it. You can sleep at night and have less stress because you got the right lease.
Well, that's good. I have not recently, but in years past, I've had people threaten me with equal opportunity things. And I said, you know what, get in line. I don't take well to threats, but, and that's why we have attorneys, but it certainly makes our attorneys' jobs a lot easier. And it makes it much harder for the plaintiff's attorney, which, by the way, will be the United States of America, versus John Adams or versus Ian Robbins. I don't understand why my tax dollars are going to prosecute me. But anyway, I certainly makes it easier if we follow these rules. So let's talk about these three and move right through them. Why is rental history important, and how does it survive that test of relevant information?
Well, I think it's all about also due diligence. So now I'm looking at somebody I give a key to, and I'm allowed to find out about what's going to happen. Do they know how to pay the rent? So the term arm's length transaction comes up. So when I find out what their rental history is, are they renting from an apartment? If that's an apartment, that's a business, and they're not emotionally involved, they're not a relative, and I'm allowed to send them a form that I have. And my always question is, what's the number of the office? And I get their email, and I send them a form, and I get a written report back. That's a very correct way to get my information. And I'm asking questions like, how long were they there? Did they pay on time? How many times were they late? Were there any bounce checks? Would you rent to them again? Any complaints from the neighbors or the residents nearby? Very basic, but safe questions. And I'm allowed to make a decision off of that. But let's say it's not an arm's length transaction. Let's say it's a relative, okay? And you ask them how long, how much money are they paying per month? Well, right away, we don't know if that's accurate information, but let's say they say $700 per month, but on the application it says $900. Well, already I've gotten something where they've not given me accurate information. Well, I don't tell them they're a liar. I just send them an email. You wrote down 700 and you wrote down 900, but your aunt says 700. can you give me more information? And I'm going to get an interesting answer, whatever it can be. But I don't really care. I just want to have, I know that I just caught them maybe in not telling me the truth. So I look at, let's say they have no rental history. I'm allowed to score them with no rental history because I'm managing risk again. So now I'm taking and my son doesn't have any rental history, so I'm not discriminating. We won't go there. Point is, there's a lot of people that have no rental history, but why should I give them this asset that I have to repair, that I put a lot of time and money and effort and money, and I have to pay the mortgage if they have no rental history? I'm allowed to make a decision and go forward with what I need to do to make sure that when I give them a key, that I'm going to get paid.
Very good. Now, let me ask one question about rental history. Do most landlords that you contact agree once they have a signed request from the tenant? Will they give you that information, or do they say, I'm sorry, it's our policy not to release this information to anyone?
Well, if it's an apartment complex, I have a high 95 plus response rate from an apartment complex. I've even reached out all the way to Hawaii and gotten a response very quickly.
Wow. The reason I ask, Ian, is from time to time we have people ask us, what was your experience with this person? And we just have a policy. We don't, even if the tenant requests it, we don't make that information available. It's not public, and we just don't share it. And that's to prevent anyone from turning around and suing us for having told the truth. I just don't want to go there. And I understand the predicament of the landlord, and I certainly want to cooperate any way I can. But as you say, you've got to treat everybody the same way. And I don't want to get involved. So anyway, when you have a tenant move out, if they're applying somewhere else, are you willing to respond to a request for that information?
John, I can't remember the last time I've gotten that request, which surprises me. But I would probably respond in a very generic way.
Sure.
I do understand what you're saying about your policy, and as long as everybody who asks for information from you, you give them the same answer, a fair housing person would say, John Adams gave the same answer to every person who requested.
Right.
When I get my first one, I'll let you know. But I have
okay. That just hadn't happened. Let's move to our second element of the application that you are looking at real carefully, and that is the area of likelihood of, or I guess confirmation of employment, or likelihood of continued employment, and current and likely future income. How do you go about getting that information and know that the person you're talking to on the other end of the line is in fact in a position to know whether or not what's on the application is true?
Well, I don't know. I'm going on faith on some of it. One thing I do that I'd like to share with your listeners, if I'm calling somebody about employment, I'll write down, I talked to this person, Joe Jones, at 8:43 a.m. on January 10th, 2021. I just want to document. And I think if I was in court and I have 30 different documentations of all these different applications, a judge would say, you tend to take really good notes. You have a very good pattern here. Looks like, or even if I leave a message, I'll write down what I did. So I'm going to document every action because I'm so limited in my time anyway. So if I do something, I'm going to write it down that I've done it. So that's first thing. But if I'm working with a big company, sometimes they won't talk to me, and I get that. There are tools. There is something called the employment line that we can go into later, but you can call and get very basic information. But I'll also look at employment as what type of employment. So let's use a mechanic. I look at that as a very transferable skill, probably in high demand. So now I don't want them changing locations probably every month or 2 months, but if they were there for 1 year and then went somewhere for 2 years, I look at that as a solid income. But or even someone cutting hair, that's a very transferable skill. But there's other professions that I have to give that some more thought and get more documentation.
One of the, just mentioning different professions or occupations, if you will, as you know, some of my little rentals are in the area of Emory University and Emory University Hospital. And some of the best tenants I have ever had are nurses. They tend to be very responsible. I don't think you could be a nurse and be irresponsible. And
By design.
they also tend to have very stable income. And if for some reason they got short on cash, nurses can always pull an extra shift if they want to. I mean, talk about somebody who's in high demand, and I suspect going forward will be in high demand, and it's going to be people in the healthcare profession. So that's interesting. Do you
I also look at that, John, as
Go
education.
ahead.
Well, they spent a lot of time to get to that point. They didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a nurse.
That's right.
They applied themselves to a lot of internal work before they can become a nurse. But I want to say something about employment for a minute. I just one comes to mind. We can go into so many, but I had a guy who was a roofer, and his wife or his girlfriend worked for retail, and his 3 generations of roofing and retail. There was a mall nearby. Looked like it was pretty solid. Well, within a period of 3 months, she decided she wanted to go to school and gave up her retail job. 1 income gone. And the roofer got hurt. No income. So you can go from 2 to 0. So going back to managing risk, I made a good decision, but at the same time, I have 0 income coming into that house. It had nothing to do with the protected class. This guy can't be a roofer anymore. She wanted to go better herself in another profession. What do I do now?
Well,
Read the book.
read the book. That's right. All right. Do you have a income standard that is based on rent? I hear people all the time saying that I don't want the rent that you're going to have to pay to be more than 1/3 of what your gross income is on a monthly basis, or whatever the number is. Do you have a set number?
Well, I've never heard the 1/3 part. I've heard it in a little different direction.
Three times
But
rent. Yeah.
3 times rent. But I would say that I use that as a standard, and it is in writing. But I'm also looking at source of income, and I've done some reading, and you got to be careful with that because it could be coming from government sources. But I like what you say in your book and your tapes and your talking. You want someone that's going out and making a living every day and putting on their tool belt and going out and make a living. Now, you got to be careful with that, but you're right. It doesn't mean that but the answer, I think it's yes, I have a standard of 3 times, but I'm also looking at how long is the income? Like if somebody wants to pay me advance rent, which I don't do, and we don't want to go there, what happens when the advance rent runs out? Am I going to get a stream of income? I want you to stay for a while.
Yep.
So if you have money now, what about after it runs out? So hopefully I answered that question.
Very good. Very good. And finally, let's talk about the power of credit history and credit scoring. And I would like to preface our examination of this by reminding everyone that in about 1970s, mid 70s, I think is when this happened. Actually, it was 77, 78. Margie and I bought our first house for us to live in. And we'd been married a year and a half, and I'd been renting for my brother and this other jazz. And a friend of the family made a home available, and I didn't have a job. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I did have a degree, but that and a dollar won't buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And so he said, look, I'm selling you the house for $50,000. There's a $40,000 loan on it. Why don't you go see Mr. Anderson out at Tucker Federal? And of course, this was a portfolio loan. And this is before I even knew what a portfolio loan was, but it meant that Tucker Federal had it in their portfolio and it had not been sold on Fannie or Freddie. And he said, go see Mr. Anderson and tell him that I think you're going to be okay. And I'll say something to him. So I get out there and he looks at my application and he says, well, you seem not to have a job. I said, well, sir, I don't, but I'm going to. And he said, well, I'm sure you are. He said, how are you going to make the payments? And I said, well, my wife's working part-time at Fulton National Bank and this, that, and the other. And I've got some money coming. And finally he said, oh, hell, what does your father do? And I said, well, he is a professor at Agnes Scott College. And Mr. Anderson was quite impressed that my dad was a professor at Agnes Scott College. And I don't know what brought him around, but he said, well, if you get in trouble, he'll probably bail you out. I'm going to go ahead and approve this. Now, that was then, and this is now. And I think what happened was the banking industry and the lending industry came to the conclusion that they needed to have a tool that only took into account relevant information that did not include any of the information related to protected classes. So Fair Isaac and Company really was one of the first companies that created what they call algorithms. And I am first to admit, I don't know what an algorithm is. I think it's a formula of some sort, but it doesn't ask your age because your age really is not relevant. It doesn't ask your skin color or your faith or where you're from. It doesn't ask if you're male or female. It doesn't ask all of these things. It just doesn't care. All it cares about is your past performance in meeting your credit obligations. And it takes that information and attempts to predict the likelihood that you will meet your commitments. And that's exactly what you're talking about when you talk about managing risk. Is that why our credit score is so important?
It is very important. And yes, I do look at the credit score, and everything you said is spot on. And your listeners would probably ask the question to you and me and anyone else, what is your minimum credit score? But here's where I'm going to go offline. I don't have a minimum credit score, but doesn't mean I don't agree with 80% of what you said. It's just that I've had people say I went bankrupt 2 years ago and they have a 795 credit score. And something didn't make sense there. I get it. They cleaned up. That's the law. The law says we start fresh, and they had very little credit. But if they had a bankruptcy, the question would be, which you can't put on paper, is, well, what changes did you make after your bankruptcy? And they're not probably going to go into detail on that or made many changes. So I look at what's on the score and on the report. I do read it. So the very first thing, and I've been like, when I check a credit score, I'll see if there's any rental collections. And right away, if there's a rental collection, I've got something that I can work with. Again, I'm going to send an email. Hey, you said you've never had a rental collection. It's one of our questions, and it's showing up on your credit report. Can you give me more information? right away I now have two documentation about what happened. So I can deny them and sleep at night. But I'm also going to look at what you said. So let's go back to a pattern. I agree with that. Yes. But you have a car. Okay. Well, when did you get this car? Well, if you got this car in November 2020 and you just set it up for 7 years of payments, we both know, as you teach, John, it's a declining asset. And why are you setting up for 7 years of payments? I mean, we go all down that. So that's a problem because that's a liability. Now, they might have a great 1-1 and they paid November, December, and that's a great score. But let's look a little deeper and see about all the next 7 years of payments and the level of payments that's going to come. What are they going to pay first? The rent? Or are they going to pay for the car?
I bet they're going to pay for the car.
Right. But then I also look at the pros. I'm not the pro. I look at Aaron rents. If they have a collection of Aaron rents, these guys are good at getting over the pro's pro. I mean, that's just one example. But these guys know their game. And if you beat Aaron rents, that's just one example, then you're pretty good. And sure enough, I actually met someone and she said, you're right. We're really good. And if it's on there, they've done something they shouldn't have done. So yeah. I look a little closer at the score, but I know everybody's going to ask, what score do you have? And I know I'm supposed to have an answer. I'm not going to give you one, but I will say that I will look deeply at what it is.
So you're really weighing a variety of factors here, strengths. If in your judgment, a strength over here compensates for a weakness over here, that may be acceptable to you.
Correct. That's right. But if I see but then, there's medical. So you got to be careful with that.
Sure.
On the scores, because could they control that? No, but there's a liability there. There's also education. But I also look at it from education. Like if I see many educational loans they've tried several times and then they didn't pay, they're telling me that they may not finish what they started. Again, no judgments. It's just that when you're in my house, are you going to finish what you start? Now you're speaking to me through your credit report.
Very interesting. And I think a lesson for everyone watching and listening right now, to focus on relevant factors in the screening of their tenants, in the consideration of their applications. Those three key elements, again, are the rental history, the employment situation, and the income history, and then finally the credit report and the credit score. And one thing you said earlier, I want to just put an exclamation point on, has to do with documentation of your actions. When you call somebody, you talk to Ed Johnson at 8:32 a.m. Who confirmed employment. I think that's very important. You're right. If you get in front of a judge, they are looking for a pattern of behavior that applies to everybody. But once they identify that pattern, I think it improves their consideration of your actions as a business. And you can prove this stuff. And what I really like is you're in the business of limiting liability, evaluating that liability. We're not here trying to keep people out. In fact, just the opposite. I want my people to stay forever. If I could get somebody to commit to a 30-year lease with inflation rider, I'd do it right now. I mean, why not? Have them buy the house for me. So although it's 66, I'm not sure I'll be here in 30 years, but we'll see what happens when it comes to that front. Ian, well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with folks as they think about consideration of applications?
Well, sure, because John, in your book, you talk about this, and I appreciate what you have in there. And it's called an adverse action letter. People don't like to get rejected, but going back to the concept of documentation. So you've come up with some things that don't look good, and your adverse action letter is a good start. I will say that I use a different one because it has a lot more boxes to check. Okay. And I once asked an attorney, I said, should I check all the boxes? And she said, just pick the one that's the strongest. And I don't agree. I actually check them all. I just want them to go fight 7 battles, because I have 7 battles to fight, and you're not going to win on this fair housing deal. Whatever. The point is that an adverse action letter for our audience is you've said no, and you don't have to go into why in a lot of detail, but you have to cover it in some way. And your adverse action letter in the book talks about that. And so now you have a documentation to answer to that you've told them correctly. Again, you said something actually a while back. You don't like to talk to anybody. Most of mine is done by email. Once I meet with them, if you watch closely, I meet with them. I talk to them on the phone very quickly. I meet with them very quickly at the house, but there's so many people around. It's a very quick conversation. And the rest of it is by email. And so, and if they call me and they ask about their application, which they do, I'll just say, check your email, and I'll get off the phone, because I don't want anything coming back to me that I said something.
Very, very wise advice. The adverse action letter, I'm not sure that it is actually required when you turn down someone for a rental application. But the reason that I love it is it says, it begins by saying your application could not be accepted, period. And the decision was made in whole or in part based on information supplied by the following credit reporting agency.
Have a good time.
And that says to them, don't bother Ian, go sue Equifax.
Have a great
And they can spin their wheels at Equifax for years and get nowhere. In the meantime, you're sitting pretty with a much better tenant. So I like that. And I sort of like checking all the boxes too. What's the difference? I mean, might as well see what happens. Ian Robbins, you, as always, are a font of knowledge, and we always enjoy talking with you. And I
had a good teacher, a great teacher in you, John. I had someone, by the way, John, I just have to tell you today, I had somebody who I learned something from you. I told them about it. They said, Ian, did you know you told me that several years ago, and I used it, and I avoided a big problem. And it was all because of the root of John Adams. Everybody, you should know that. I'm not just saying that because he's here. I'm telling you, this is what a tenant said to me today, and she gave me the move. Oh, yeah, because she remembered what I told her. Yeah.
Well, and thank you for that. So many of the recommendations that I make in the Landlord Survival Guide are based on contributions from folks like you, ideas from attorneys that we work with who may have run into a situation that I've never run into, but they don't want the rest of us to make maybe the same mistake that their client made. And it's sort of like it's a joy for me because I'm able to, I guess you could say, edit all of these good ideas that come in and try to put them all together to give landlords the best shot possible. But I just want to reiterate, and you and I have talked about this, a good tenant is a valuable asset. And this is somebody we want to keep for years and years and years if we possibly can. If you've got people that move out every year and then somebody new moves in, it's hard to make money that way.
Well, that's why you wrote the book called Survival.
That's right. That's right.
The Landlord Survival Guide.
All right. Ian Robbins, thank you, my friend. When is the next meeting of the Landlord subgroup of Georgia real estate investors, please?
Well, we've been on vacation because we took off Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we're going to dust it off and we're coming back. Please bear with me. We meet the fourth Thursday of the month. So that would be In January, we are going to be meeting on January 28th at 7 o'clock. I'd love to tell you at the Georgia Ria building, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah,
So
probably
it'll be
not.
by Zoom, but I'm hoping.
Well, I think we're all hoping this COVID thing gets done. Ian, I got to run because we are out of time for this week, but thank you. And we look forward to talking with you again real soon.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you, John.
Okay, very good advice. Special thanks to Ian Robbins for making that possible. I hope you got some good ideas out of that. If you have any questions, put them in Q&A. And I would encourage each of you, we have the biggest crowd that we have ever had right now. And you ought to go in and review the Q&A because there's some very good questions and I hope some good answers there as well. And that's what this show is all about, is to try to help you get the best deal possible on your real estate. If you're a first-time home buyer, I want you to get that first-time home buyer money. If you are a realtor, real estate professional, I want you to take advantage of all the tools that are out there. We are just about out of time. I do want to mention this. I'll give you a warning, okay, for next week, for next Saturday. First, we will be concentrating heavily on the emergency rental assistance program next week, just because I think that's going to be breaking news. Additionally, we may know something about the plans of the Biden administration toward real estate. We'll see when that comes out, but there is a piece of software that I would encourage you to go look at. And we're not going to cover it this week because we're out of time. But go look for Lumen, the word Lumen, followed by the numeral 5. Just go to Google, type in Lumen 5, and that will be our software of the week next week, and we'll be looking at it. You can get a head start by heading there right now. And I think that's just about where we are. Let's see what's left here. We do not want to start over with Ian. And so I'm going to try. No, that didn't work. I'm going to try to advance beyond him. And we are back. It didn't work as usual. Remember, and this is just a parting shot, that in landlording, we say that this is a business. It's not a hobby. Get a strong lease agreement. Make sure you use a written rental application and do proper screening like Ian and I have been talking about. Make sure you collect the rent. Don't let people stay there for nothing. And so many of you have a hard time getting the rent in. That's the number one job that you have. Inspect the interior of the property at least once a year. That needs to be documented. It needs to be in writing. I also would like pictures taken at that time, and your tenant needs to know you're coming. Otherwise, they're going to just tear the place to shreds. And so anyway, get inside the property. In Georgia for sure, but I think anywhere, go ahead and do your move in and move out inspection checklist. And remember, last but not least, your tenant is a valuable asset. And you need to educate them. You need to treat them like a child. You need to tell them what to do, but be gentle with them because they're just like small children. So, hey, we have run out of time. This is hard to believe. Well, guess what, folks? That's the 3-0 mark for the John Adams Show, the Real Estate Coffee Break. And this is John Adams reminding you Your financial future is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. Hey, make sure yours is a good one. So long, everybody.